Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. So I was browsing Reddit the other day and I came across a really nice thread. It was basically a question about why Burgundians are doing so poorly, and the person linked a picture to their AoE2 stats, basically 1v1 random map, all ELO, and they had a win rate of 46%. He went on to say in the post that it seemed like a civilization with a good economy, some good units, strong cavalier and whatnot, and he didn't understand why they were doing so poorly. And honestly, this caught my eye because I was thinking the exact same thing. Every time I played Burgundians, I feel like they're a solid civilization, and I also don't understand the stats. And I know what you're thinking, Hera, this is all ranks. It's obviously the fact that Burgundians are hard to play. If you just check 2000 plus rating Burgundian stats, it's going to be a different story. Turns out it's not. I actually checked those stats myself not too long ago, and the win rate I think is even worse. I think it was like 44% last time I checked. Maybe now it's sitting a little higher, but the point stands. Burgundians have a low win rate and a significantly low win rate across the board at low ELO, mid ELO, and high ELO. And now the question is, why? So let's go ahead and take a deep dive into the Burgundians and try to figure out why this could be the case, and try to give some points from my personal experience, and then also give some points about, just generally speaking, how the Civ tends to play out and what the issues could potentially be. Now, the first point I want to mention is that the Burgundians actually have a very, very strong option, which is the Cavalier and Castelage, and they also get access to the Custodier. So in terms of cavalry, Burgundians are absolutely top tier. And it was not long ago that we had a video / meme from the Viper where he was asked, how do you beat Burgundians? And people were saying, just go camels. And he said it's not so simple. You can't just beat Cavalier and Custodier by just going camels, because Burgundians also have other options. And I thought that was a very good point from Viper. Burgundians are not limited to those strong options, although it's probably their best play in most cases. But it's just funny that a couple years ago, Burgundians were seen as a very, very strong civ. And now, a couple years later, look at their win rate down in the gutter. So let's go ahead and analyze why that's the case. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that most 1v1 random map games are Arabia. So even though in the Reddit thread he didn't have Arabia only ticked in, I think it's a fair assumption to assume that these stats are coming from a primarily Arabia only. And the way I'd support that argument as well is by saying that Burgundians are a even better arena civ. They're probably like a top 3 to top 5 arena civ, and arena is the second most played map on the rank ladder. So if this was not an Arabia problem, then it had to be an arena problem, and it's certainly not an arena problem, unless everybody's like griefing with Burgundians on ranked arena. But I just don't think that's realistic. I think that this low win rate is mainly coming from Arabia, and I have a few theories as to why. So let's go ahead and just dive right in with what I consider to be the first big weakness of the Civ on Arabia, and that really comes from its eco bonus. So its eco bonus is really good, but it also comes with an inherent downside, which is very unique, by the way. I can't think of a lot of other examples where an eco bonus can also kind of be a bad thing. So the Burgundians get access to double bid axe earlier, and it's also cheaper, and this is the same for every economy upgrade. They get it 1 rage earlier. So this seems great. You just pick up double bid axe earlier. What's the issue? Well, the issue is because you get double bid axe in Dark Age, you have to pay for it. All right. And that's probably considered optimal play, because if you're not doing that, then you're not getting any bonus from Burgundians. So you're falling behind other civs that do get bonuses. So you'd probably want to get double bid axe. It's logical. But by doing that, you can't click up as fast as other civilizations. Normally, civilizations, at least at the top level, they click up something like 19 pop, sometimes even 18 pop with Loom, whereas Burgundians are doing like 19 pop at best, but usually something like 20 pop is a lot more standard, 20 pop with Loom. So by getting double bid axe in Dark Age, you're going to slow yourself down by 1 pop, meaning that you're not going to be able to get the initiative. Furthermore, going on to Feudal Age, you might want to do the same thing again, but with Bowsaw. So again, you have the option, you could not get Bowsaw and just play a generic civ, but that's probably not the way to go. So most players would opt to pick up Bowsaw. I think a lot of players would opt not to get Heavy Plow, so they'd get Horse Collar, but they wouldn't get Heavy Plow in Feudal Age. It would be considered a bit too greedy. So we can make the exception for Bowsaw because that gives us more resources collected per minute, whereas Heavy Plow takes a little bit longer to pay off in the long run. And so you can definitely make the argument that, okay, we'll skip that one. So with the assumption that we're getting Bowsaw again in Feudal Age, that's once again taking 200 resources away from our pocket that will only pay back in a few minutes. So not only do we not have the initiative going into Feudal Age, but also we're down 200 resources start of Feudal Age because we're picking up Bowsaw. So even though this could be considered correct play, it still gives up the initiative once again in early Feudal Age. So now basically what we're saying with the Burgundians is that the first 15 minutes of the game, you will not have any initiative. And then only after the first 15 minutes can you start to see some return on your investment from the Bowsaw tech. And you can see why this could be a problem at all ELOs, by the way. Let's start with high ELO elo first. At high elo, you have a very big chance of snowballing the game with this early trades. Like, few scouts run into your base, you lose 1 vil, you lose 2 vils because you're a bit slower to getting your stuff set up with Burgundians, and suddenly the bow saw is useless. Like, the extra res you're getting from bow saw is just not going to pay off compared to those 2 vils that you lost. So at high level, it's very easy to see that, you know, not having the initiative can definitely backfire on you quite heavily. And we consider other civilizations like the Dravidians that get 200 wood upon hitting feudal age compared to the Burgundians that are losing 200 res upon hitting feudal age by picking up bow saw. You know, you can kind of see how a civ like Dravidians can really pile on the pressure onto a civ like Burgundians, and it can be very hard to deal with. And I have a general rule that if you lose 1 vil, it's probably, you know, okay to early feudal pressure, but I think 2 vils or more at highest level, it's a bit too hard of a deficit to climb back out of. And that's why games can end in early feudal age if players are not careful. And that's just how competitive top tier AoE2 plays out. Okay, but what about like mid elo, low elo? 2 vils advantage should not snowball the game, and that's exactly the point I agree with. For sure, that's the case. 2 vils, I've done enough coaching to know it's not going to snowball the game. As long as the Burgundian player is able to continue playing and he doesn't get completely flustered, there's always a chance for a comeback because players will not be playing as sharp and as optimally to snowball off a 2 villager advantage. It's not that substantial. But I would argue that at lower or mid elos, it's not just the 2 villagers that you can potentially lose that's the issue. I think not having the initiative leads to players getting flustered on defense. And I think that Burgundians having to pick up those upgrades and not having enough resources to work with and not getting to feudal age as fast as some of the other civs, I think that is a pretty big problem for a lot of the mid elo and the low elo players. You're going to get into situations where the pressure is always on you, and even if that pressure is not as good as it could be, it's not as clinical from your opponent because it's low and mid elo, it's not going to be like perfect, but just the fact that you're always under pressure makes the game way harder to play. Let's be honest, guys, let's just all, you know, admit that when we're under pressure and we're getting attacked in our base, it's a lot more intense and the game feels a lot harder to play than when we're the ones attacking. And I've seen it time and time again where, you know, I'm coaching someone who's around like 1,000 or 1,400 elo, and because he's getting attacked, he stops doing some of the basics that he normally does, like queuing villagers, queuing army, thinking about the game, thinking about the strategy, and so the game tends to fall apart. And I would argue that this is probably the biggest problem with the Burgundians as a whole and why their win rate is so low. The fact that they have an economy bonus that you probably have to use that sets you behind and gives up initiative for the first 15 minutes. If you survive these first 15 minutes, then I would say that the Burgundians are a very good civilization and there shouldn't be any issues as to why your win rate is low after that. However, I will still consider a few other options just to kind of enrich the video. So one of the options could be that the Burgundians don't exactly have the best overall tech tree. So you're missing a lot of your techs from your archery range. So you can't get something like Arbalest, for example. You're missing the last armor in your skirms. So while you do have, you know, strong cav and you have pretty good halbs, you're kind of missing some of the options from the range unit department. You're kind of only limited to hand cannoneer and no armor skirms for the late game, which is not as strong as you'd like to have in a lot of cases. And your siege is also not that special aside from the bombard cannon, which is pretty decent, pretty strong. You're lacking a lot in the siege department. So I don't think the Burgundian late game is good enough to make up for such an awkward early game. On top of that, one of the best Burgundian bonuses is getting access to those relics. But one could argue it's incredibly hard to fight for the relics if you don't have that initiative coming out of the early game. Think about how most games tend to play out if you want to contest relics. The plan is usually like get a few units on the field, pressure in feudal age, fully wall your base, aim for the faster castle age, and then you can right away drop a monastery, and then with some army in early castle age plus the monks coming out right away, that's generally speaking a good recipe to picking up relics. I made a whole Patreon video on the topic of getting relics every game, as well as a really cool relic trick you can use. But even with those ideas on the table, even if one player would, you know, have all the information and try to execute, Burgundians would still not be able to pick up the relics consistently against another player with the same information, because the other player would probably be able to get the castle age faster on a normal day. He'd have initiative coming out of the feudal age, and also he would potentially have better units for the first 3 minutes of castle age. And this is the last point of the video, and I think the last point that kind of makes Burgundians a little bit weak as a 1v1 civilization. So you want to get the relics, you're a bit later to castle age. Now what's your best unit to fight for the relics? You have a few options. You can go cav archer, you can go light cav, you can go cavalier. You know, you could go crossbow and skirm, but you don't get any bonuses for those, so it feels weird. Cav archer, you're missing bloodlines, so not only you don't get any bonuses, but it's actually a weaker version than a generic fully upgraded cav archer. So okay, what about, you know, cavalier and castle age? That sounds great. Well, it's good, but the problem is you don't get cavalier tech so fast. It takes about, I think, a minute and a half or minute 20. There's been a change recently, but it takes a significant amount of time to research cavalier. And before that, your knights don't have bloodlines. So for the first couple minutes of castle age, your knights knights will be weaker than a generic Civ's knights that just gets fully upgraded knights with bloodlines. They'd get bloodlines in feudal, spam 2 stable knights in castle, and you'd be stuck there waiting for your cavalier tech to come in. So they have initiative yet again, not just from the feudal age, but also in early castle age, making getting relics even harder. If you want to go light cav, same story. You don't get access to bloodlines, so a generic Civ with bloodlines will be a better light cav Civ. The only reason that Burgundians can contest relics in arena so well despite not having bloodlines is because no one gets bloodlines in arena. Your economy is too fragile in a fast castle situation. But in a 1v1 situation, you're very rarely going fast castle into relic control. You're going feudal age pressure, trying to do some damage and making some army, expanding your economy. By the time you get to castle age, chances are you're gonna be on 2 stables minimum, maybe even a third if you're going all in. And Burgundians just can't compete in the first 2 minutes of castle with their units. Sure, obviously if you do get the cavalier, that unit is quite strong. It's like a knight with bloodlines, but it also has an extra 2 attack base on it. So it's quite a strong unit and probably one of their better options. But that comes in a bit too late, and that's already coming in late after, you know, having a late feudal age. So it's like late into feudal age, late getting to castle age, awkward early feudal age, and then also in castle age you have to wait another 2 minutes before competing. It's a lot of downtime for the civilization, and it's just a lot of waiting and a lot of being on the back foot. And if there's one thing I know about Age of Empires is that being on the back foot, being on defense is definitely the harder role to play. And I think it's very hard to argue against that. Being the attacking player, you have so much map control, you have so much vision, you have so much momentum, and you can really dictate how the game goes. And so the Burgundians really struggle to play towards their strength because they're always on the back foot and because they're always going to be slow to get to the next big thing. So overall, when it comes to Burgundians, is this a call for like Burgundians getting buffed? I honestly don't think so. And I have a suggestion on a way to play Burgundians that might actually help us break the situation. I don't think Burgundians need a buff because the Civ itself plays out quite well. Like, despite all these problems, I think it still feels like a good Civ. Every time I play it, I feel like, okay, it's a bit awkward, but if I play smart and play strategically, I feel like it's a pretty strong Civ. So the way I recommend you guys try out to play the Civ and potentially help raise the win rate up together is to not play it as a cavalry Civ in the early game. I think that sets you way too far behind. By going scouts early, you're not taking advantage of the bow saw bonus of having more wood, and you're also playing right into your weakness of not having bloodlines. So I personally think the best opening with the Burgundians is actually playing archer or skirm opening. Not playing men at arm because you're losing that res early. It's a bad strat with the Civ. Not playing scouts because I think you play into your weaknesses a bit too much. But playing into archer and skirm in feudal age lets you use your wood bonus very effectively. It lets you pick up bow saw easily. You can obviously skip heavy plow. You play with archers and skirms depending on the situation, few spears if needed, and you kind of just develop into a strong economy. You also can pick up wheelbarrow for pretty cheap and get a nice little advantage in feudal age, and then you can make your way to castle age where you're playing with crossbow and or skirms, and those units are getting the benefits or their upgrades kicked in right away. So while you don't have any direct bonus to those units, I would argue that because you're saving a little bit of wood because you have a faster wood income, you do have some bonus towards playing archer and skirm mix, or one or the other depending on the situation. And I think that makes it a bit easier to play for the relics in early castle age, since you'd be up to castle age faster and not spending too much on scouts, and you have a pretty good shot in early castle age and not having to wait 2 minutes for cavalier tech to come in. And of course, you don't want to stick on those units all game. Remember, you don't get access to Arbalest, you don't get access to Thumb Ring, so you don't want to stay on Arbalest or archers the entire game. It's not going to be a good idea. But I think what is a good play is going into those units, picking up some relics, and then switching into some of your stronger options like Cavalier into Paladin, or Coustadier, or even Hand Cannoneer, Bombard Cannon, Halp, whatever the case may be. Obviously, every game will call for something else. So in conclusion, I think that the low win rate for the Burgundians is absolutely justified based on how the civilization tends to play out. It's one thing that could be a bit confusing upon first glance, but I think if you take a deep dive, it does feel logical, at least to me. Is this a call for a buff? Should the civilization just get, something extra or something special? I would say no, it's not needed. It's still a really strong Civ in other settings, and I think it's still playable on Arabia and 1v1s in general. I just think that perhaps we have to change the way we view the Civ. We have to delay playing into its strengths, into its strong units, and first play into its more stable options, archers and skirms, and then build up to play for the relics, which is one of the strongest options for the Burgundians, and only get into the strong options in the late game. Or you can just be Mr. Yo and play a unique unit from the get-go and somehow make it work. I don't know how he does it, but that's probably the one Burgundian player we should all be learning from. So if you guys can learn from Mr. Yo, get to Coustadier somehow ASAP, and then always win in Castle Age, that's definitely one option. But I think the way I suggested is probably a little easier to achieve for your average player and not not your beast of a Mysterio. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you guys did enjoy this discussion. I hope my discussion brings some value over there on the Reddit thread as well. Obviously, I could have typed this out in a nice little Reddit post, but I think there's just a little too much, information I want to squeeze in to just make a post. So hopefully this video would enrich the discussion there and would hopefully shine some light onto the topic and onto the question. Obviously, I don't have all the answers here, but I think, with my experience and my dozens of games played, I can maybe bring an interesting perspective to listen to. Thank you so much for watching the video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you guys did enjoy it. Let me know in the comments below if you guys thought I was wrong about something. If you guys want to add something to the discussion, you're obviously always more than welcome. I actually love when I see more discussion taking place. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you guys around. Make sure to check out Patreon for the exclusive guides and content, and my live stream on Twitch in the description below if you're interested for more content from me or to support me further. And as always, stay safe, have a great rest of your nights, and peace.